May 19, 1944, 14:19 hours, 230 miles northeast of Bougainville. Commander Walton Pendleton stood on the bridge wing of USS England and watched the ammunition counter drop. 96 Hedgehog projectiles fired, 4 complete salvos, 4 misses. The Japanese submarine was still down there, still alive, still maneuvering. Pendleton wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. The tropical sun hammered down on the steel deck, turning the ship into a furnace. But the heat was not what made his shirt stick to his back. They were running out of chances. England carried 144 Hedgehog projectiles total. 48 remained. 2 salvos, maybe 3 if they stretched the spacing. After that, they would have nothing but depth charges, and depth charges meant losing sonar contact at the critical moment. Depth charges meant the submarine would escape. Below decks in the sonar room, sonarman Second Class John Williamson pressed his headphones tighter against his ears and stared at the oscilloscope. The green line spiked with each ping. 500 yards, bearing arrow 42 degrees. The contact was solid, but the submarine kept jinking left and right, creating disturbances in the water that made it hard to predict where it would be when the projectiles arrived. Williamson was 22 years old. He had been tracking this submarine for 2 hours. His ears rang from the constant pinging. His hands were slick with sweat. He had never hunted anything this long before, never missed this many times. Bridge, sonar, contact holding at 500 yards. Target is kicking rudder, creating wake disturbances. His voice was steady, but his heart hammered in his chest. On the foredeck, 6 men hauled 65-pound Hedgehog projectiles from the magazine hatch and loaded them into the launcher cradle. Gunner's mate Second Class Robert McCarthy grabbed the next projectile and shoved it onto a spigot. His arms burned. His back ached. They had been loading and reloading for 2 hours without a break. 4 attacks. 4 failures. Around him, the loading crew worked in silence. Nobody was joking anymore. Nobody was talking. Petty Officer Davis wiped his face and looked at McCarthy. "You think this one will hit?" McCarthy did not answer. He just grabbed the next projectile. 320 feet below the surface, Lieutenant Commander Yoshitaka Takeuchi stood in the control room of Submarine No. 16 and listened to the sonar pings hammer against the hull. Ting, ting, ting. Relentless. He had been evading for 2 hours. The American destroyer escort above him would not give up. 4 times he had heard the splashes, 24 objects hitting the water each time, then silence as they sank. Then nothing. No explosions. The Americans were using contact weapons, not depth charges. That meant every miss gave him another chance. But Takeuchi knew his luck would not hold forever. The Americans were learning his pattern. Each attack came closer. He wiped his face and looked at his executive officer. "Take her down to 350 feet. All ahead slow. Rudder 10 degrees left. Hold for 20 seconds, then 10 degrees right. Keep the pattern random." The executive officer repeated the order. Around them, the crew moved quietly. They had been at action stations for 2 hours. Some of them looked at the overhead as the sonar pings continued. Ting, ting, ting. Nobody spoke about what would happen when the Americans finally got lucky. England turned into her 5th attack run. Pendleton gripped the rail and watched the bow cut through the moderate swells. His executive officer stood beside him with a stopwatch. The plotting team behind them called out ranges and bearings as Williamson fed them continuous sonar updates. 400 yards, closing, bearing steady. This had to work. Pendleton had commanded England for 4 months. He had trained his crew on Hedgehog attacks dozens of times, but training was not combat. Training targets did not fight back. Training targets did not jink and create wake disturbances and push down to 350 feet where the water pressure made the sonar echoes fuzzy. He thought about the Japanese submarine commander down there. Whoever he was good, calm, disciplined, not panicking, just methodically evading, buying time, hoping the Americans would give up or run out of ammunition. Range 380 yards, sir. Recommend firing solution. Pendleton took 1 breath. Fire Hedgehog. The launcher thumped. 24 projectiles rippled out in pairs, arcing high into the air with white smoke trails. They splashed into the water 200 yards ahead of England in a circular pattern 130 feet across. Then they sank. 23 feet per second. Williamson kept his eyes locked on the oscilloscope. The submarine contact was still there, still moving. He held his breath and counted. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15 seconds. The projectiles would be passing through 300 feet now, close to the submarine's depth. 20 seconds. Then he heard it, a sharp metallic crack in his headphones. Then another, then a third, then chaos. 4 explosions, maybe 5, maybe 6. The oscilloscope went white with noise. Bridge, sonar, multiple detonations, 4 to 6 hits confirmed. Contact is breaking up. His voice cracked. Inside I-16, the first Hedgehog projectile punched through the pressure hull just forward of the control room. 35 pounds of Torpex explosive detonated on contact. The blast tore through 2 compartments in a fraction of a second. Men died before they could scream. The second projectile hit near the engine room. The third hit aft. The fourth struck the forward torpedo room, where 8 Type 95 torpedoes were loaded and armed. The warheads cooked off in a massive secondary explosion. The pressure hull split open like a tin can. 284 tons of steel and machinery, and 97 men were crushed by the ocean in less than 3 seconds. A column of water and debris erupted toward the surface. Pendleton felt the shockwave before he heard it. The deck under his feet shuddered. Then the sound reached them. A deep underwater boom that rolled across the ocean like thunder. England's fantail lifted 6 inches out of the water. Men on the stern grabbed for handholds. The ship shook. Then silence. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Williamson stared at his oscilloscope. The contact was gone. Just empty water where the submarine had been 10 seconds ago. He pulled off his headphones with shaking hands. Bridge, sonar, contact lost. No further returns. His voice was barely a whisper. On deck, the Hedgehog loading crew stopped. McCarthy stood with a projectile in his hands, staring at nothing. Davis turned and looked at him. "We got him." McCarthy nodded slowly. His arms were still shaking from the hauling. They had fired 120 projectiles to kill 1 submarine. 4 misses before they got it right. He set the projectile down gently and sat on the deck. Pendleton watched the water ahead of England. 30 seconds passed. Then debris started surfacing. A wooden plank, a life jacket, pieces of cork insulation, then oil. Thick black oil spreading across the water in an expanding slick. Within 10 minutes, the slick was half a mile wide. Within an hour, it stretched 3 miles long. 97 men were down there. Takuchi, his executive officer, the sonar operator who had been listening for the splashes, the engine room crew, the torpedo men. All of them gone in 3 seconds. Pendleton thought about the submarine commander. He had been good, calm under pressure, disciplined. It had taken 5 attacks to kill him. Under different circumstances, they might have respected each other, but this was war. There was no respect, only survival. USS George signaled by lamp. "Well done, England. Return to base for resupply." Pendleton acknowledged. He turned to his officer of the deck, secure from general quarters, set course for Purvis Bay. The crew stood down slowly. Some of them were grinning. Their first kill. Others were quiet. The Hedgehog crew sat on the deck near their launcher, too exhausted to move. Williamson stayed in the sonar room for another 10 minutes, listening to empty water, making sure the contact did not come back. It never did. May 19th, 1944, 14:54 hours. USS England had sunk her first submarine. Nobody aboard knew it yet, but they had just started something that would never be repeated. In the next 12 days, this crew would sink 5 more Japanese submarines, 6 kills in 12 days. They would set a record that would stand for 80 years and counting. But on that afternoon, all they knew was they had done their job. They had stopped IR-16 from reaching Buin. The rice would not be delivered. The Japanese garrison would keep starving. And somewhere in the darkness, 3,000 feet below, the wreckage of IR-16 was settling onto the bottom, taking Lieutenant Commander Yoshitaka Takeuchi and 96 men down with her. May 22nd, 1944, IR-351 hours, 250 miles north of the Admiralty Islands. The radar operator aboard USS George stared at the green blip on his SG screen. 14,000 yards, bearing 303 degrees, moving. He watched the contact for 5 seconds to make sure it was not a ghost return or wave clutter. The blip moved steadily across the screen, tracking northwest at approximately 8 knots. Surface contact. His hand reached for the voice tube. Bridge, radar. Single target bearing 303, range 4,000 yards. Contact is moving at 8 knots. Classification surface vessel or surfaced submarine. The officer of the deck grabbed his binoculars and scanned the black horizon. Nothing, just darkness. Moonless night, no stars. Perfect conditions for a submarine to run on the surface and recharge batteries. He called for the captain. Aboard USS England, 3 miles northeast, sonarman Williamson sat in the sonar room drinking coffee. 4 days since I-16. 4 days of empty ocean. The crew was tired. They wanted mail. They wanted a hot shower. They wanted to go home. The radio crackled. England from George. Radar contact bearing 303. Range 4,000 yards, possible submarine. Stand by to intercept. Williamson set his coffee down and put his headphones on. His hands moved automatically across the QCJ controls, checking gain settings, adjusting filters. Here we go again. Commander Pendleton arrived on England's bridge and read the message. A surface submarine meant vulnerability. The Japanese did not have radar. They were blind beyond visual range. George was tracking them from 14,000 yards, and they had no idea an American warship was closing on them. But they would hear diesel engines. They would dive. Pendleton knew the drill. George and Raby would attack first. England would finish it. He grabbed the microphone. All hands, general quarters. Set condition zebra throughout the ship. This is not a drill. The Japanese submarine was RO-106, a Type K6 coastal submarine, 279 feet long, 9 to 61 tons submerged, 4 21-inch torpedo tubes forward, a 3-inch deck gun, crew of 38 men commanded by Lieutenant Keitai Uda. She had been on station for 17 days, sitting at a designated patrol area watching for American fleet movements. Report contacts, attack if possible, stay hidden, survive. Those were the orders. RO-106's batteries were at 42% after 36 hours submerged. Uda had surfaced at Osu 330 to recharge. The diesel engines rumbled as they pushed the submarine through calm water at 8 knots, while simultaneously spinning generators to feed electricity back into the battery banks. Uda stood in the conning tower with binoculars scanning the horizon. Darkness. Nothing but darkness. He checked his watch. They needed 90 more minutes of charging before they could dive and maintain full underwater speed. He looked at the battery gauge inside the conning tower hatch. 44% now, climbing slowly, too slowly. At 0350, USS George turned on her searchlight. A beam of white light stabbed across the water and hit RO-106 directly. The light struck Uda like a physical blow. He could not see his hands, could not see the ocean, just searing white brilliance burning through his retinas. He threw his arm up, but the light went straight through. His night vision was destroyed instantly. Dive! His voice cracked. Dive, dive, dive. The klaxon screamed through RO-106's hull. Men bolted to their stations. The diesel engines shut down with a mechanical clang. Electric motors engaged with a whine. Vents opened. Seawater roared into the ballast tanks with a sound like thunder. Uda grabbed the hatch rim and dropped through, pulling the hatch closed behind him as water began washing over the deck. The bow tilted down. The stern rose. RO-106 slipped under in 35 seconds, but George was already at 1,800 yards. The submarine had been caught blind on the surface, and now she was running for her life. At 04:15, George fired her first Hedgehog salvo. Williamson, listening from 3 miles away aboard England, heard the splashes through his headphones. 24 distinct impacts transmitted through the water, then silence. Miss. George had fired it where the submarine had been on the surface, not where it would be 30 seconds later at 150 feet depth. USS Raby moved in next. She had gained radar contact at 11,000 yards and closed aggressively, her diesels roaring at flank speed. Her sonar operator picked up the contact at 1,200 yards. The submarine was diving hard, trying to reach a thermal layer where the temperature difference would bend sonar waves and create a blind spot. But RO-106 was built for coastal work, not deep ocean. Her pressure hull was rated to 245 feet maximum. Anything deeper and the rivets would start weeping, then streaming, then the hull would fail catastrophically. Raby did not know that. She just knew she had a contact and she was going to kill it. At 0421, Raby fired her Hedgehog. Miss. The projectiles landed 50 yards astern of where the submarine had turned 15 seconds earlier. Aboard England, gunner's mate McCarthy stood by the Hedgehog launcher and watched the horizon. He could see flashes from Raby's weapons, splashes in the dark water. Then nothing. No detonations. Just silence. He looked at Petty Officer Davis. That is one miss for George, one miss for Raby. Davis nodded. How many times are they going to let him slip away? Raby fired again at Arrow 428. Miss! The submarine was jinking hard now, turning every 20 seconds, making it impossible to predict position. Raby's sonar operator was good, but the submarine commander was better. At 0435, Raby fired a third time. Miss. McCarthy watched the third set of splashes fade into darkness. That is 5 total misses. What are they doing wrong? Pendleton stood on England's bridge with his arms crossed, watching Raby work the contact. His jaw was tight. He did not criticize. He did not comment. He just watched and learned. After the third miss, he turned to his officer of the deck. Bring us in. Flank speed. I want to be at 2,000 yards in 5 minutes. Inside RO 106, at 210 feet depth, Lieutenant Uda gripped the periscope rail and watched the depth gauge. The Americans had attacked 5 times, 5 misses. But Uda was not celebrating. His battery gauge read 38%. He had burned through precious power evading the attacks, running the electric motors at full speed, operating the rudder continuously. If he could not surface soon to recharge, he would be dead in the water by sunrise. But surfacing meant exposing RO 106 to American radar again. The trap closed around him with every minute that passed. Uda's hands trembled slightly as he held the rail. Trapped. The word repeated in his mind. If we surface, their radar kills us. If we stay down, we die when the motors stop. His executive officer stood beside him, watching the battery gauge drop to 37%. Sir, we need to make a decision. Uda looked at him. Maintain current depth. Come left 15 degrees. We wait them out. The executive officer's face showed doubt, but he repeated the order. Around them, the crew worked silently. The sound of active sonar pinged against the hull. Ting, ting, ting. Relentless. Unyielding. Like hammer blows on a steel coffin, England closed fast. At SO 425, Williamson picked up sonar contact at 1 hour 800 yards. Faint at first, then stronger. He adjusted the gain and the return solidified. Bridge, sonar. Contact bearing 090. Range 1,800 yards. Target is moving at 3 knots, depth estimated 200 feet. Solid metallic return, no thermal layer interference. Pendleton acknowledged. This was clean. No distractions. 1 submarine, 1 hunter. He ordered the approach. The Hedgehog crew was already at battle stations. They had been standing by for 40 minutes, watching George and Raby fail. McCarthy grabbed the first projectile and loaded it onto a spigot. He did not look at anyone. He just worked. Load. Check. Next spigot. Methodical. Fast. Professional. This was kill number 3. They were getting good at this. England closed to 600 yards. Pendleton calculated the firing solution. The submarine was moving at 3 knots on a steady bearing. Either the commander thought he had evaded detection, or he was conserving battery power. Either way, it made him predictable. Pendleton waited until the range dropped to 420 yards. Fire Hedgehog. The launcher thumped. 24 projectiles rippled out and splashed down in a circle 130 feet across, directly ahead of RO 106's predicted track. Williamson listened. His fingers gripped the edge of the console. 10 seconds. 15 seconds. Nothing. No detonations. Pendleton's jaw tightened. The submarine had turned again. Prepare for second attack. The loading crew moved fast. 3 minutes to reload 24 projectiles. They had done this 100 times in training and twice in combat. McCarthy's arms burned, but he kept working. Davis worked beside him without speaking. They both knew what failure meant. The submarine would escape. 38 men would live. England's record would end at 2 kills. None of them wanted that. At 0501, they reported ready. Pendleton ordered the second run. England came around and closed to 380 yards. The submarine was still there on the sonar scope, still moving slowly, still trying to conserve power. Fire Hedgehog. Inside RO 106, Uda heard the splashes again. 24. He knew what it meant. Contact weapons. Forward throwing. The Americans had not given up. They were closing in. He looked at the depth gauge. 215 feet. The hull creaked under the pressure. He needed to go deeper, but the submarine was already groaning. 5 more feet, and the welds would start leaking. 10 more feet, and they would be taking water into the bilges. Uda turned to his executive officer. Prepare to emergency surface. If we have to fight on the surface, we fight. The executive officer stared at him. Surface? We will be blind up there. Uda nodded. We are blind down here too. At least on the surface, we have the deck gun. The Hedgehog projectiles sank through the dark water at 23 feet per second. They passed through 100 feet, 150 feet, 200 feet. At 215 feet depth, traveling northwest at 3 knots, RO-106 was exactly where Pendleton had predicted she would be. The first projectile struck the pressure hull just forward of the control room, where Uda stood gripping the periscope rail. He saw it for a tenth of a second. A black cylinder, 7 inches in diameter, coming through the hull plating like it was paper. Then light, heat, sound. Everything happened simultaneously. The Torpex explosive detonated on contact. 35 pounds of high explosive expanding at 28,000 feet per second. The blast wave vaporized everything within 6 feet of the detonation point. 2 more projectiles struck the engine room. A fourth hit the forward torpedo room, where 8 Type 95 torpedoes were loaded. The warheads cooked off in a massive secondary explosion that split RO-106 in half. The ocean at 215 feet depth does not forgive structural failure. Water pressure crushed the submarine in less than 3 seconds. 38 men ceased to exist before their brains registered pain. Lieutenant Keitai Uda never felt the explosion. He simply stopped being. England's deck shuddered from the blast wave. Men grabbed handholds as the stern lifted. On the foredeck, McCarthy set down the projectile he was holding and stared at the water ahead. A massive bubble broke the surface 400 yards forward, followed by oil and debris. Pieces of cork insulation, a wooden plank, part of a periscope housing. He exhaled slowly. 2 attacks, 2 kills in 4 days. We are getting good at this. Pendleton stood on the bridge and watched the oil slick spread across the black water as dawn began to break in the east. The slick was already 200 yards wide. Within an hour, it would stretch for miles. He thought about the submarine commander down there, Uda. He did not know his name, would never know his name, but he knew the man had been skilled, calm, under pressure. He had evaded 5 attacks before England killed him. Under different circumstances, Pendleton might have respected him. But this was war. There was no room for respect, only survival. He turned to his officer of the deck. Signal George and Raby. Resume search pattern. Maintain current heading. We keep hunting. In the sonar room, Williamson pulled off his headphones and rubbed his face. His ears rang from 2 hours of constant pinging. He stared at his cold coffee and thought about numbers. 2 kills, 4 days, 135 men dead. I-16 had carried 97. RO-106 carried 38. His headphones had transmitted the sounds of their deaths, the sharp crack of Hedgehog hits, the deep booming roar of secondary explosions, the groan of pressure hulls imploding under millions of pounds of water pressure. Sometimes, in the quiet moments between contacts, he wondered if the Japanese sonar operators had heard England's screws approaching before they died. He wondered if they had known what was coming. He pushed the thought away and checked his equipment. There were more submarines out there. Intelligence said at least 4 more, maybe 5. More contacts to track, more attacks to call, more men to kill. He took a sip of cold coffee and put his headphones back on. The war was not over. May 23, 1944, 0559 hours, 250 miles northwest of Kavieng, New Ireland. The radar detector screamed inside RO-104's control room. Lieutenant Hisashi Izubuchi dropped his coffee cup and grabbed the display panel. The needle was pinned at maximum, high-frequency emissions, bearing 095 degrees. He stared at the signal strength indicator. Full scale. They were not just close. They were on top of him. His hands trembled as he grabbed the voice tube. Dive. Emergency dive. All hands clear the bridge. This is not a drill. The klaxon shrieked through the submarine. Men bolted from their bunks. The bridge watch dropped through the hatch, pulling it closed behind them as water began washing over the deck. RO-104's bow tilted down. The vents opened with a roar. Seawater hammered into the ballast tanks. But Izubuchi knew they were too late. The Americans had found them. Aboard USS Raby, 3 miles southeast, the radar operator marked the contact. Surface target, 8,000 yards. bearing 285 degrees, moving 8 knots. The officer of the deck grabbed his binoculars and scanned the horizon. There, a black shape on the calm water, small, low profile, submarine running on the surface. He reached for the voice tube. Sound general quarters. Contact is diving. The klaxon rang through Raby. Men ran to their battle stations. This was the 3rd submarine in 4 days. The crew moved fast. They knew what was coming. USS England received the message 3 minutes later. Pendleton was on the bridge drinking coffee when the radio crackled. All units from Raby. Radar contact bearing 285, 8,000 yards. Target classified submarine, now submerged, closing to attack. Pendleton set his cup down and grabbed his binoculars. Another one. He turned to his officer of the deck. General quarters, all ahead flank, close on Raby's position. In the sonar room, Williamson put his headphones on and adjusted his equipment. Here we go again. 3rd kill in 5 days. His hands moved automatically across the controls, but something felt different this time. Heavier. He thought about the number. 173 men dead. How many more before this patrol ended? Inside RO 104, Izubuchi stood at the periscope station and watched the depth gauge, 150 feet. The submarine was diving hard, her electric motors whining at full power, battery electricity draining at maximum rate. He checked the battery indicator, 52%. They had been charging for only 25 minutes when the radar detector went off. Not enough. Not nearly enough. His executive officer stood beside him, silent. Around them, the crew worked their stations without speaking. Everyone knew what the radar alarm meant. The Americans had found them. Now it was a question of survival. Raby closed to 2,400 yards and gained sonar contact at 0610. The submarine was at 120 feet, moving west at 6 knots. Raby's captain ordered the first attack. At Oso 16 sign, Raby fired her Hedgehog. 24 projectiles arced out and splashed down ahead of the submarine's estimated position. They sank. Silence. Miss. The submarine had turned during the dive. Raby had fired at where the submarine had been on the surface, not where it was now underwater. Izubuchi heard the splashes through the hull. 24 impacts, forward-throwing weapons. He knew what they were. Hedgehog. Contact weapons. If they hit, he would never know. The submarine would simply cease to exist. He had heard about these weapons from other commanders. American technology. Deadly. Efficient. He turned to his executive officer. Hard right rudder. Come to course 270. All ahead full. Make depth 200 feet. RO 104 tilted down and turned hard. The electric motors screamed as they pushed the submarine through the water at 8 knots. The battery gauge dropped to 49%. Raby attacked again at 0623. Miss. Then at 0629. Miss. Then at 0634. Miss. 4 attacks, 4 failures. The submarine was jinking hard, changing course every 20 seconds, varying depth. Raby's sonar operator called out firing solutions, but the submarine kept turning. Every prediction was wrong. Aboard England, McCarthy stood by the Hedgehog launcher and watched Raby work the contact. He saw the splashes, counted them. 24. Silence. 24 more. Silence. He looked at Davis. That is 4 misses. How long are we going to watch this? Davis shook his head. As long as it takes. But McCarthy could see the frustration building across the task force. USS George moved in to assist at 0645. She gained sonar contact and fired at 0652. Miss. Inside RO 104, Izubuchi was running out of options. The battery gauge read 42%. They had been evading for 45 minutes at maximum power. The Americans were not giving up. He heard a 5th set of splashes. Then silence. Another miss. But his batteries were dying. He looked at his executive officer. How much longer can we maintain full power? The executive officer checked the battery log. 30 minutes, maybe 40. Then we will have to slow down or surface. Izubuchi's throat tightened. If they slowed down, the Americans would kill them. If they surfaced, American radar would see them and they would be killed anyway. They were trapped. George attacked again. Miss. And again. Miss. And again. Miss. And again. Miss. And again. Miss. 9 attacks total between Raby and George. 9 failures. Aboard George, Commander Planes stood on the bridge and watched his ship fire another salvo. The projectiles splashed down. Silence. He slammed his fist on the chart table. The sound echoed across the bridge. 9 attacks. 9. We have fired over 200 Hedgehog projectiles at one submarine, and that bastard is still down there, still alive, still mocking us. His officer of the deck stood silent. Planes grabbed the radio microphone. His voice was sharp. All units from George, cease attacks. England, move in and take the shot. We are wasting ammunition. Pendleton acknowledged. His face showed no emotion, but his hands gripped the bridge rail tighter. 9 misses. The submarine commander was skilled, better than the previous 2, or maybe just luckier. England surged forward at flank speed. At 8:15, Williamson gained sonar contact. Range 1,600 yards. Bridge, sonar. Solid contact bearing 290, range 1,600 yards. Target is moving west at 4 knots, depth 200 feet. Clean track. No thermal interference. Pendleton ordered the approach. McCarthy and Davis loaded the Hedgehog projectiles without speaking. This was the moment. 9 ships' attacks had failed. Now it was England's turn. Inside RO-104, at 200 feet depth, Izubuchi stared at the battery gauge. 34%. His hands shook. They had been running for over 2 hours. The air was getting thick. The carbon dioxide scrubbers were struggling to keep up. His throat felt tight. They were going to die down here, not from Hedgehog, from suffocation. When the batteries died, the scrubbers would stop. The air would turn poison. 38 men would choke to death in the darkness. He looked at his executive officer. Prepare to emergency surface. If we have to fight on the surface, we fight. The executive officer stared at him. His face showed what they both knew. On the surface, they would be blind. No radar. The Americans would see them first. The 3-inch deck gun was no match for American firepower, but dying in combat was better than suffocating in a steel coffin. At 8:19, England reached firing position, range 420 yards. Pendleton gave the order, fire Hedgehog. The launcher thumped. 24 projectiles arced high and splashed down in a perfect circle directly ahead of RO-104's predicted track. Williamson listened through his headphones. 10 seconds, 15 seconds, 20 seconds. Nothing. Silence. Miss. Pendleton's jaw tightened. The submarine had turned again. Prepare for second attack. Reload Hedgehog. The loading crew moved without speaking. 3 minutes. Load. Check. Next spigot. Mechanical. Fast. Professional. Inside RO-104, Izubuchi heard the splashes. 24. Different ship. The pattern was different. The timing was different. This crew was better. He felt it. This was not Raby. Not George. This was something else. He gripped the periscope rail and waited for the projectiles to sink. 20 seconds. 30 seconds. Nothing. They missed. Relief washed through him for 3 seconds. Then reality returned. The battery gauge read 32%. They had maybe 20 minutes left. He turned to his executive officer. Hard left rudder. Come to 260. Make depth 220 feet. Maybe we can lose them. England came around for the second attack. Williamson held contact the entire time. The submarine was at 220 feet now, moving southwest at 3 knots, conserving power, running out of time. At Juzo 8:34, Pendleton gave the order, fire Hedgehog. 24 projectiles rippled out and splashed down. The first projectile punched through RO-104's pressure hull, 3 feet aft of the control room. Izubuchi felt the impact through the deck plating, a metallic clang, like a hammer on an anvil. He looked down. Water was spraying through a hole the size of his fist. A jet of water under 95 pounds per square inch pressure. Then the Torpex detonated, 35 pounds of high explosive expanding at 28,000 feet per second. The world turned white. Heat, sound, pressure. Izubuchi's body was vaporized before his brain registered pain. The control room ceased to exist in 1/10 of a second. A second projectile hit the engine room. A third struck the forward battery compartment. A fourth, fifth, sixth projectile hit in rapid succession. 10 hits, maybe 12. Williamson counted the detonations through his headphones. His eyes went wide. Multiple hits. Massive secondary explosions. Contact destroyed. The shockwave hit England 3 seconds later. The deck shuddered. Men grabbed handholds. A column of water and debris erupted 400 yards ahead, climbing 70 feet into the air before collapsing back into the ocean. RO-104 imploded at 220 feet depth. The pressure hull, weakened by 12 Hedgehog detonations, failed catastrophically. Water hammered into the submarine at supersonic speed. 38 men were crushed, drowned, and torn apart in less than 3 seconds. Lieutenant Hisashi Izubuchi never got the chance to surface and fight. Neither did his crew. On England's foredeck, McCarthy stood with a projectile in his hands and stared at the debris field. Oil spreading across the water, wood planks, a piece of decking. He set the projectile down carefully and sat on the deck. 3 submarines in 5 days, 6 attacks for IR-16, 2 attacks for RO-106, 2 attacks for RO-104. They were getting faster, more accurate, better at reading submarine evasion patterns. Davis sat beside him. "You think we are getting a reputation?" McCarthy nodded slowly. "I think the Japanese submarines already know our name. If they do not, they will soon." Pendleton stood on the bridge and watched the sun climb higher. 3 submarines, 173 men dead. I-16 with 97. RO-106 with 38. RO-104 with 38. He thought about the submarine commanders, men whose names he would never know. Skilled, brave, determined. They had fought hard and died hard. But England had been better. England had Hedgehog. England had radar. England had sonar. England had a crew that functioned like one perfectly coordinated machine. The Japanese submarines were good. England was better. He turned to his officer of the deck. "Signal George and Raby. Resume patrol. Intelligence confirms 2 more submarines in this area. We find them, we kill them." The war continues. In the sonar room, Williamson sat in his chair staring at the oscilloscope. The green line traced across the screen. Empty water, no contacts, no targets, no submarines. His hands were shaking, not from fear, from something else. Exhaustion. Weight. The burden of being too good at killing. 3 submarines, 173 men. His voice had called out the firing solutions. His sonar had tracked them. His headphones had transmitted the sounds of their deaths. He was 22 years old. He wondered if the Japanese sonar operators had been 22. He wondered if they had families. He wondered if Japanese mothers would receive telegrams saying their sons were missing at sea, presumed dead. He pushed the thoughts away and adjusted his equipment. 2 more submarines out there. Intelligence had confirmed it. 2 more crews who did not know England was hunting them. He took a drink of cold coffee and put his headphones back on. The war was not over. It was just beginning. May 24th, 1944, 15:20 hours, 200 miles northwest of Kavieng. Williamson was asleep in his bunk when the general quarters alarm screamed through USS England. He jerked awake, heart hammering against his ribs. 4th submarine in 6 days. His body moved automatically. Boots, shirt, run. He dodged other sailors racing through the passageway and reached the sonar room with his hands already shaking. Not from fear, from exhaustion, from the weight of being too good at this job. He put his headphones on and adjusted his equipment before he was fully awake. The war had programmed him to react faster than his mind could think. On the bridge, Pendleton stood with binoculars scanning the horizon. The message from Commander Planes aboard USS George had been brief. Visual sighting by lookout. Submarine surfaced, moving north, range 12,000 yards, bearing 310 degrees. All units close and intercept. Pendleton lowered his binoculars. A daylight surface contact was unusual. Japanese submarines rarely ran on the surface during the day unless they were desperate, damaged, or both. Either way, it made them vulnerable. He turned to his officer of the deck. "All ahead flank. I want to be at gun range in 15 minutes. The Japanese submarine was RO-116, a Type K6 coastal submarine, 279 feet long, 525 tons displacement, 4 torpedo tubes, crew of 38 men commanded by Lieutenant Noboru Yamada. RO-116 was damaged. At 0800 that morning, an American PBY Catalina flying boat had spotted her on the surface and attacked with depth bombs. The bombs missed, but the near misses cracked a main ballast tank seam. RO-116 could still dive, but she leaked. Every time Yamada tried to go deep, seawater flooded into spaces where it should not reach. The pumps could handle it for a while, but eventually the accumulated weight would drag the submarine down past her crushed depth of 245 feet. The steel pressure hull would fail. The ocean would hammer in. 38 men would die in seconds. Yamada had three choices: surface and try to reach Truk on diesel power, hoping to outrun American ships, dive and hope the pumps kept pace with the flooding, or scuttle the boat and save his crew. He chose the first option. At 1500 hours, he surfaced RO-116 and began running north at 8 knots. He knew American ships would see him eventually, but maybe he could reach Truk before they did. It was not much of a plan, but it was the only plan he had. USS George gained visual contact at 1515. The lookout spotted a black shape on the horizon, low profile, white wake streaming behind. George turned toward the contact and opened her throttles to 23 knots. USS Raby followed. USS England, 3 miles south, turned northwest and pushed her diesels to maximum power. 3 American destroyer escorts converging on one damaged Japanese submarine trying to limp home. The outcome was not in doubt. Only the details remained to be written in blood. Aboard RO-116, Yamada stood on the bridge and scanned the horizon through binoculars. He saw them at 1525. 3 American warships, hull down on the eastern horizon but closing fast, black smoke pouring from their stacks. He checked their bearing. They were not deviating. They were coming straight for him like wolves converging on wounded prey. He lowered his binoculars and calculated in his head. RO-116 was making 8 knots maximum. The American ships were making at least 20 knots, probably more. Time to intercept approximately 30 minutes. He turned to his executive officer standing beside him. Prepare the deck gun, load armor-piercing rounds, flood all 4 torpedo tubes, and open the outer doors. If we are going to die today, we die as warriors. The executive officer saluted without speaking. His face showed what they both knew. They were going to die. Below decks, the crew moved to battle stations. The deck gun crew climbed topside and began removing the waterproof tarpaulin from the 3-inch gun. In the torpedo room, men flooded tubes 1 through 4 and cranked open the heavy outer doors. RO-116 was preparing for surface combat against 3 warships. It was suicide, but it was the death Yamada had chosen. At 1540, USS George reached gun range, 6,000 yards. Commander Planes ordered his forward 3-inch gun to open fire. The gun barked. The shell screamed across the water in a high arc and splashed down 40 yards short of RO-116, throwing up a white column. Planes ordered a correction. The gun barked again. This time, the shell landed 30 yards beyond the submarine. Bracket. The gunner had the range now. But before George could fire again, a flash erupted from RO-116's foredeck. The submarine's 3-inch gun fired back. The shell screamed toward George and exploded in the water 20 yards off her port bow, throwing spray across the bridge. Planes smiled grimly. The submarine was fighting back. Brave, futile, but undeniably brave. He grabbed the microphone. All gun crews commence firing. Sink that submarine. Aboard England, McCarthy and Davis stood by the Hedgehog launcher and watched the gun battle develop. They could see splashes erupting around the submarine as George and now Raby poured shells at her. White columns of water rising and falling. Then they saw the submarine fire back. Small orange flashes from her deck gun, shells landing dangerously close to the American ships. Davis shook his head slowly. That submarine commander has balls. He knows he cannot win, but he is fighting anyway. McCarthy nodded. That is what warriors do. They fight until they cannot fight anymore. Then they die fighting. RO-116 took her first hit at 1545. A 3-inch shell from USS George struck the base of the conning tower and detonated. The explosion tore through the thin steel plating and killed 2 men instantly. Yamada was blown off his feet. He landed hard on the deck plating, ears ringing, vision blurred. He pushed himself up and looked around. His executive officer was down, blood streaming from a gash across his forehead. The forward lookout was gone, blown overboard by the blast. Yamada grabbed the voice tube. Damage report. The response came back 20 seconds later. Flooding in the conning tower base. Heavy flow. We are taking water faster than the pumps can expel. Hull integrity compromised. Yamada looked at the American warships closing in. They were at 4,000 yards now. He could see their gun crews working frantically, see the muzzle flashes, feel the concussions as shells hit the water all around RO-116. Near misses shook the submarine. He knew what was coming. His submarine was going to die. The only question was whether she would die with her deck gun still firing or die trying to run. Yamada chose to fight. All ahead full. Turn toward the American ships. Prepare to launch all torpedoes. If we are going down, we take one of them with us. Pendleton watched through binoculars as RO-116 turned directly toward the American formation. The submarine was burning now. Thick black smoke poured from the damaged conning tower, but she was still making way, still fighting. Her deck gun fired again. The shell screamed past England's bow, close enough that Pendleton heard it whistle before it exploded in the water 50 yards beyond. Too close. He respected the submarine commander's courage, but courage alone would not save him from 3 American warships. Pendleton turned to his gun captain. "Open fire. Destroy that submarine before she gets a lucky hit." England's forward 3-inch gun roared. The shell crossed 6,000 yards in 4 seconds and struck RO-116 amidships. The explosion tore a hole in the pressure hull. Water began flooding into the engine room. The submarine's bow dipped noticeably, but she kept coming, black smoke trailing behind her like a funeral shroud. At 1550, RO-116 fired her first torpedo, then her second, then her third, then her fourth. 4 Type 95 torpedoes running hot, straight, and normal at 46 knots toward the American formation. White wakes streaked across the calm water. Lookouts aboard George spotted them immediately and shouted warnings. Planes ordered hard right rudder. George heeled over sharply as she turned. The first torpedo passed down her port side, missing by 20 feet. The second torpedo passed astern, missing by 30 feet. The third torpedo ran directly beneath USS Raby without detonating. Faulty depth setting. The fourth torpedo missed England by 40 yards. All 4 torpedoes missed. RO-116 had fired her last weapons and accomplished nothing except to mark her own grave. A shell from USS Raby struck RO-116's foredeck and exploded directly on the deck gun. The gun crew disappeared in the blast. Shrapnel tore through the thin deck plating. The barrel of the 3-inch gun tilted crazily to one side, blown off its mounting. Yamada watched his gun crew die. 6 men vaporized in 1 second. He looked at his executive officer, who had returned to the bridge with a blood-soaked bandage wrapped around his head. The executive officer's eyes met his. They both knew it was over. Yamada spoke quietly. "Give the order. Abandon ship. All hands topside. Prepare to scuttle." The executive officer nodded and shouted into the voice tube. "Abandon ship. Abandon ship. All hands on deck. This is not a drill." Men began climbing out of RO-116's hatches like ants fleeing a burning nest. They carried nothing. No life jackets, no supplies. Just themselves. They jumped into the water and swam away from the sinking submarine as fast as they could. Yamada counted them. 25, 28, 30, 32. The submarine had carried 38. 6 were already dead, killed by American shells. Yamada stood on the tilting bridge and watched his crew abandon ship. The bow was underwater now. The stern was rising at a 20-degree angle. Water poured through the shell holes, flooding compartments, drowning machinery. He turned to his executive officer. "Go. Save yourself." The executive officer shook his head. "I stay with you, Captain. It is my duty." Yamada grabbed him by the shoulders and looked into his eyes. "That is an order. Go. Save the crew. Tell them what happened here. Tell them RO-116 fought to the last shell. Tell them we died as warriors." The executive officer's face crumpled. Tears ran down his cheeks, mixing with blood from his head wound. He saluted. Then he jumped into the water. Yamada stood alone on RO-116's sinking bridge. The submarine was tilting forward at 45 degrees now. The bow was completely submerged. The stern pointed at the sky. He could hear the ocean flooding through the pressure hull, a roaring sound like a waterfall in a cave. RO-116 had maybe 90 seconds left before she went under. He looked at the American ships one last time. They had stopped firing. They were watching him, waiting for the end. Yamada thought about his wife in Yokohama. Her name was Akiko. They had been married for 6 years. He wondered if she would receive the telegram. He wondered if she would know he had died fighting. He pulled his service pistol from its leather holster, checked that a round was chambered, and put the barrel under his chin. The metal was cold against his skin. Then he pulled the trigger. The gunshot echoed across the water. Lieutenant Noboru Yamada collapsed on the bridge. RO-116 tilted forward another 10 degrees and began her final dive. Aboard England, Williamson listened to the submarine's death through his headphones. He heard the flooding, heard the bulkheads failing, heard the massive implosion as the pressure hull finally gave way at 400 feet depth. Then silence. Bridge, sonar, contact lost. Target has sunk to the bottom, depth approximately 400 feet. No further returns. He pulled off his headphones and sat in the darkness of the sonar room. 4 submarines in 6 days, 211 men dead. He had called out the firing solutions. His sonar had tracked them to their deaths. His headphones had transmitted the sounds of their final moments. He wondered if Yamada had been on the bridge when the submarine went down. He would never know. Pendleton stood on England's bridge and watched Japanese sailors swimming in the water. 32 men. Some were swimming strongly. Some were struggling. One was floating face down, already dead. Commander Planes was ordering George and Raby to recover survivors. Small boats splashed into the water. American sailors rowed toward Japanese sailors. Some of the Japanese fought when they were pulled from the water, punching and kicking. Some surrendered quietly, exhausted. Some tried to swim away and drowned before the boats could reach them. Pendleton watched the rescue operation unfold and thought about the submarine commander. He had not seen anyone on RO-116's bridge when she went under. Maybe Yamada had jumped at the last second and was among the swimmers. Or maybe he had chosen to go down with his ship. It was what Pendleton would have done in his place. The rescue operation took 45 minutes. By 1640, 30 survivors had been pulled from the water, 8 dead, 30 captured. RO-116 rested on the bottom 400 feet down, her hull crushed, her crew scattered between the ocean floor and American prison camps. The hunter-killer group reformed and prepared to resume patrol. Intelligence confirmed one more submarine in the area. RO-108, one more target, one more hunt. The pattern continued. McCarthy stood on England's foredeck and watched Japanese prisoners being transferred to USS George for transport back to base. They looked young. Maybe 18, maybe 20, soaked uniforms clinging to thin bodies, shivering despite the tropical heat, defeated. One of them, a boy who could not have been older than 19, made eye contact with McCarthy. The Japanese sailor's eyes showed something McCarthy recognized immediately: relief. Relief to be alive. Relief that the war was finally over for him. McCarthy nodded at the young sailor. The sailor nodded back, a small gesture of mutual recognition. Then he was gone, hustled below decks by American guards. Davis stood beside McCarthy watching. That makes 4 submarines in 6 days. 1 more to go. McCarthy did not answer immediately. He was thinking about Lieutenant Yamada, whoever he was, choosing to fight 3 American warships with a damaged submarine and a single deck gun, choosing to die on the bridge rather than surrender. That took a kind of courage McCarthy was not sure he possessed. He hoped he would never have to find out. Pendleton ordered England to resume patrol. The diesels roared to life. The ship turned north into empty ocean. In the sonar room, Williamson adjusted his equipment and began scanning for contacts. One more submarine out there, RO-108. Intelligence had confirmed her position 40 miles north, running south, probably heading for Truk. England would find her within 24 hours. England would kill her, just like the 4 before her. The pattern was clear now. Unbreakable. England always won. The Japanese submarines always lost. That was the mathematics of this war. Cold, precise, inevitable. Williamson put his headphones on and listened to the empty ocean. Tomorrow, there would be more contacts, more attacks, more men would die. But today, for this moment, the ocean was silent. He closed his eyes and tried to remember what silence felt like without death attached to it. He could not. May 26, 1944, 02 hours, 220 miles southeast of Truk, aboard RO-108. Lieutenant Shigaki Oki sat at the radio station in RO-108's cramped control room and listened to silence. 5 submarines had stopped transmitting. I-16, RO-106, RO-104, RO-116, RO-111, all silent, all presumed sunk. The submarine picket line had collapsed in 13 days. Now RO-108 was alone, the last boat running, the last crew still alive. Oki pressed the headphones against his ears and listened to static. He had tried to raise the other submarines every night for the past week. Nothing. Just empty frequencies where his fellow commanders used to report positions and contacts. At 00:45, Imperial Navy headquarters had sent the withdrawal order. All surviving submarines return to base immediately. Use maximum caution. Enemy hunter-killer group operating in your area. Exercise extreme vigilance. The transmission ended with coordinates for a safe route to Rabaul. Oki had plotted the course: 7 days submerged running, 7 days hiding, 7 days praying the Americans would not find him like they found the others. He stood up from the radio station and looked at his executive officer. We dive at 0230. Maximum depth. Silent running. No unnecessary noise. No equipment tests. We become ghosts until we reach Rabaul. The executive officer nodded. And if they find us anyway? Oki met his eyes. Then we die like the others. But we will not die without fighting. Prepare a message for transmission. I want it ready to send on my command. The executive officer pulled out a message pad. What should it say? Oki thought for a moment. Write this. To all Imperial Navy units. 5 submarines destroyed by American hunter-killer group in 13 days. Ship believed to be destroyer escort, designation unknown. Tactics, forward-throwing weapons, highly effective. Recommend extreme caution in this operational area. Signed, Lieutenant Shigaki Oki, Commanding Officer RO-108. The executive officer wrote it down. When do you want to send it? Oki checked his watch. If we detect American ships, send it immediately. Our last duty is to warn the others, even if it costs us our lives. May 26th, 0400 hours, 180 miles southeast of Truk. Aboard USS England, Williamson sat in the sonar room with his headphones on, listening to ocean sounds he had heard for 14 days straight. Clicks of shrimp, groans of whales. The steady hum of England's own propellers reflected back through thermal layers. No submarines, no contacts, just empty water. His replacement was still sick. Half the crew had food poisoning from bad meat. Williamson had been on watch for 8 hours. His back ached, his eyes burned, his hands trembled from exhaustion. But he kept listening because that was his job. 6 days since RO-116. 6 days of searching for the last submarine intelligence swore was out there. RO-108, the final target, the last kill. Then they could go home. Williamson adjusted the gain on his QCJ sonar and tried to stay awake. He thought about the 5 submarines England had already sunk. 249 men dead. Their voices transmitted through water before the explosions. Their screams cut short by hedgehog detonations. Their deaths measured in sonar returns and debris fields. Williamson had stopped dreaming about them. Now he just felt numb, empty, hollowed out by too many kills in too few days. At 0415, the SG radar picked up a surface contact, range 17,000 yards, bearing URSO 95 degrees, moving south at 8 knots. The radar operator stared at the screen, counted to 10. The contact was still there, still moving. He grabbed the voice tube. Bridge, radar, surface contact bearing 095, range 17,000 yards, moving south at 8 knots. Classification probable submarine. Pendleton was on the bridge in 15 seconds. He grabbed binoculars and scanned the dark horizon. Nothing visible yet. Too far, but after 2 weeks of hunting submarines, he trusted his radar operator. Sound general quarters. All ahead flank. This is the last one. Make it count. Aboard RO-108, the radar detector screamed at 0418. Oki grabbed the display. High-frequency emissions, bearing 275 degrees. Signal strength increasing rapidly. They were already close. Maybe 15,000 yards. Maybe less. He did not waste time calculating. Dive. Emergency dive. Clear the bridge. Send the warning message now. The klaxon blared through RO-108. Men scrambled to their stations. The radio operator grabbed the prepared message and began transmitting on the emergency frequency. To all Imperial Navy units, 5 submarines destroyed. American hunter-killer group. Forward throwing weapons. The vents opened. Water roared into the ballast tanks. RO-108's bow tilted down sharply. Ship designation unknown. Tactics highly effective. The submarine slipped beneath the surface. Recommend extreme caution. The transmission cut off as the antenna went underwater. Oki did not know if anyone had heard it. He would never know. USS England closed at 23 knots. Williamson gained sonar contact at 0426, range 2,400 yards, depth 190 feet, moving south at 7 knots. Bridge, sonar. Metallic contact bearing 092, range 2,400 yards. Target classified submarine, depth 190 feet, course 180 degrees. Contact is evading. Pendleton acknowledged. The crew moved with the efficiency of 2 weeks' practice. General quarters was set in 90 seconds. The Hedgehog crew was at their stations before Pendleton gave the order. McCarthy and Davis loaded projectiles without speaking. 6th submarine in 13 days. They knew the drill. Load. Check. Next spigot. Mechanical. Professional. Deadly. Inside RO-108, Oki stood at the periscope station and listened to active sonar pinging against the hull. Ting, ting, ting. The Americans had found him. He checked the battery gauge. 52%. Not enough for extended high-speed evasion. He was trapped in the same impossible situation that had killed 5 other submarine commanders. Run fast and drain the batteries. Run slow and die. He chose to fight. All ahead flank. Hard right rudder. Make depth 240 feet. If we are going to die, we make them work for it. Row 108 turned hard and dove, her electric motors straining, her pressure hull creaking as she approached maximum depth. England fired her first Hedgehog salvo at Row 432. 24 projectiles arced out and splashed down. Williamson counted seconds. 10, 15, 20. Nothing. Miss. The submarine had turned harder than predicted. Pendleton ordered a second attack. The loading crew reloaded in 2 minutes and 40 seconds. New patrol record. At Arrow 438, England fired again. Williamson listened. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, detonations, 2 hits. Contact taking damage but still maneuvering. Target is damaged, increasing speed. The submarine was trying to run. Oki felt the explosions. Not direct hits. Close. Maybe 15 feet away. Shockwaves slammed into the hull. Light bulbs shattered. Men were thrown off their feet. Flooding in the aft torpedo room. Hydraulic pressure failing. Depth control compromised. Oki grabbed the damaged control board. The submarine was dying, but she was not dead yet. All ahead emergency. Blow forward ballast. Emergency surface. If we cannot dive, we fight on the surface. RO-108's bow shot upward. Williamson's eyes went wide. Contact is emergency surfacing. Blowing ballast. Target will surface in 30 seconds. Pendleton grabbed his binoculars. He had seen this before. RO-116 had tried the same thing. Surface and fight with the deck gun. Suicide, but honorable. All gun crews prepare to engage surfacing submarine. Fire on my command. RO-108 broke the surface at 0441, water streaming off her conning tower. Oki climbed through the hatch with a pair of binoculars. He saw USS England immediately. 3,000 yards, closing fast. Behind her, USS George and USS Raby, 3 American warships. Oki shouted into the voice tube. Deck gun crew topside, load high explosive. He knew it was hopeless, but he was not going to die cowering in a damaged submarine waiting for the end. He would die fighting. England's forward 3-inch gun fired first. The shell screamed across the water and exploded 30 yards short of RO-108. Geysers of white water erupted. Oki's deck gun crew scrambled to their positions. They had the gun uncovered and loaded in 45 seconds. The gunner aimed and fired. The shell landed 20 yards off England's bow. Close. Too close. Pendleton ordered all guns to commence firing. 3 American warships opened fire on 1 damaged Japanese submarine. The gun battle lasted 4 minutes. Row 108's deck gun crew managed 3 shots before a direct hit from USS George killed them all. The explosion tore through the foredeck. Shrapnel ripped into the pressure hull. Oki watched his men die and knew the end was near. He looked at the 3 American warships hammering his submarine with shellfire. Black smoke poured from RO-108's conning tower. The boat was listing 15 degrees to port, taking water through multiple shell holes. She had minutes left, maybe less. Oki pulled his service pistol and fired 3 shots into the air, the signal for abandon ship. Men began climbing out of the hatches, but this time something was different. As Japanese sailors jumped into the water and began swimming away from the sinking submarine, one of them started waving his arms and shouting in broken English, "England! Ship name England!" The American sailors in the rescue boats heard him. They looked at each other. The word spread across the task force. England. The Japanese sailor was shouting the name of the ship hunting them. Ship England. Kill 5 submarine. Beware England. Aboard England, Pendleton lowered his binoculars. He heard the Japanese sailor shouting. McCarthy heard it on the foredeck. Davis heard it. Williamson heard it through the voice tube from the bridge. England. The Japanese knew their name. The submarines they had killed had transmitted warnings before they died. Somewhere in the Pacific, Japanese naval headquarters knew about USS England, knew what she had done, knew what she was capable of doing. RO-108 sank at 047, her bow pointing at the sky, water pouring through open hatches. Lieutenant Shigeaki Oki still standing on the bridge. He did not jump. He did not try to save himself. He stood at attention and saluted the American warships as his submarine slid beneath the surface. The ocean closed over him. RO-108 descended to the bottom, 4,800 feet down, carrying Oki and 8 men who had chosen to stay with their commander. 30 survivors were pulled from the water by American rescue boats. Williamson pulled off his headphones in the sonar room and sat in darkness. 6 submarines, 13 days, 287 men dead. But now the Japanese knew. They knew England's name. They knew what she had done. Warning messages were spreading through the Imperial Navy. Beware the ship called England. Williamson put his head in his hands. Part of him felt satisfaction. They had completed the mission, destroyed the entire picket line. But another part of him felt something else. The Japanese sailors had shouted England's name with fear in their voices, with terror. USS England had become a legend. A nightmare, a death sentence. He wondered if that was something to be proud of. He did not know anymore. Pendleton stood on the bridge and watched the oil slick spread across the water. Behind him, Commander Planes aboard USS George was sending the final report. 6 enemy submarines destroyed. Total casualties estimated 287 enemy killed, 30 captured. Hunter-killer group request permission to return to base. Mission accomplished. Pendleton thought about Lieutenant Oki standing at attention on his sinking bridge, choosing honor over survival, dying with his ship rather than surrendering. Under different circumstances, Pendleton might have been friends with men like Oki, men like Yamada, men like Uda and Izubuchi and Takeuchi, skilled submarine commanders doing their duty. But this was war. There was no room for friendship, only survival, only victory. Only the cold mathematics of kill or be killed. He turned to his officer of the deck. Secure from general quarters. Set course for Manus Island. We are going home. May 31st, 1944. 1200 hours, Manus Island, Admiralty Islands. USS England tied up at the dock after 13 days of hunting. The crew filed off the ship carrying sea bags and exhaustion. No one cheered. No one celebrated. They had sunk 6 enemy submarines in 13 days. It was a record that would stand for 80 years. But standing on the dock, staring at the green hills of Manus Island, none of them felt like heroes. They felt tired, hollowed out, changed by what they had done. McCarthy stood on the dock next to Davis and watched England's crew disperse toward barracks and showers and hot meals. 6 submarines, 287 men. Davis spoke quietly. Think they will remember us? McCarthy shook his head slowly. I do not know, but the Japanese will remember. They already know our name. That Japanese sailor shouting it while he was swimming. England. He said it like we were the devil himself. Davis nodded. Maybe we are. Maybe that is what war does. Turns regular sailors into devils. McCarthy did not answer. He just picked up his sea bag and walked toward the barracks. Williamson was the last to leave the ship. He stood in the empty sonar room for 10 minutes after the secured from General Quarters announcement, staring at his equipment, the QCJ sonar that had tracked 6 submarines to their deaths, the headphones that had transmitted the sounds of 287 men dying. He picked up the headphones one last time and put them on. Static, just static. No submarines, no sonar pings, no death. He set them down carefully and walked out of the sonar room without looking back. The record was written. Between May 19th and May 31st, 1944, USS England sank 6 enemy submarines in 12 days. I-16, RO-106, RO-104, RO-116, RO-108, and one more that would be credited later, RO-105, destroyed in the same operation. No warship in any navy, in any war, would ever match that record. The crew of USS England had become legends, but legends are made of blood and fire, and the ghosts of men who died screaming underwater. Standing on the dock at Manus Island, watching the sun set over the Pacific, the crew of USS England did not feel legendary. They felt like survivors, and that was enough.